Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Washington. The debate about who's going to pay for the deficit crisis spreads across the nation as various states are taking it out on their public sector workers. What's happening with the whole capitalist system is a matter of great debate. It wasn't too many months ago. The front cover of Newsweek magazine said, "We're all socialists now." So the debate about whether capitalism was at the core of most of the economic debate, although it seems to have died down now as a lot of stimulus money seems to have made the contradictions a little less intense for a while. But what about the future of the capitalist system? Are we facing another major depression? Are we facing a global meltdown? And is there a more rational way to have a capitalist system? Now joining us to talk about all of this is Ha-Joon Chang. He's the author of the book, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So you teach economics at Cambridge.
That's right.
And you've been trying to popularize a better undering of economics. But first of all, when you say 23 things they don't tell you about capitalism, who's they?
Right. Well, they are the supporters of free market economics, ranging from academics in university through people in the private sector, government, the journalistic world. I mean, these are people who basically try to justify the status quo. I mean, telling people, well, whatever you think about what's going on is all how it has to be. You know, I mean, you don't like income inequality, tough. I mean, that's the only way to run an efficient economic system. You don't like environmental destruction, tough. I mean, that's how we become rich. You know, so these are people who have been telling us in the last 30 years that we have to liberalize everything, we have to deregulate everything, we have to make rich people even richer so that everyone else can become rich and so on, and engineered all this massive policy changes like tax cuts for the rich, business deregulation, the deregulation of the labor market and eroding of labor rights and so on.
In your book, in the introduction, you say this is not an anti-capitalist manifesto, that capitalism is the best system humans have developed so far, and that there's a more rational way to have capitalism. Yep. How do you see that happening when one of the products of this free market and of capitalism is such a concentration of ownership and as a result, such a concentration of power politically, that even if you could imagine a more rational form of capitalism, you can't get there because these guys own everything.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of truth in there, but let's first of all not forget that actually you don't have to imagine it. I mean, these alternative capitalist systems exist. Yeah? In Sweden, in Finland, in Germany, in Japan, in France. You know, I'm not saying that these countries are somehow gardens of Eden, but you know, I mean, when people hear someone criticize free market capitalism, the kind of capitalism that the United States and Britain have practiced in the last 30 years, maybe 25 years, people immediately think, oh, okay, so then do we want to become Cuba? Do we want to become North Korea? No, actually, there are lots of different ways of running capitalism. And don't think that the free market capitalism that you have in the United States today is the only way to run capitalism. So it's not like I'm talking about some hypothetical society that might come 200 years later. No, I mean, this
but a lot of the countries you're talking about in Europe are also have bought in over the last couple of decades into this free market or what they call neoliberal economics, and they're more and more moving in that direction.
Well, yes, I mean, they are, and some of them have moved quite significantly, but I mean, you know, it's all relative. I mean, yes, the Swedes are cutting welfare state, but in the Swedish GDP, the welfare spending, social spending, account for something like still 32% of GDP when it is barely 15% in the United States. You know? So they are starting from a very different end. And yes, I mean, it is true that even in Europe, there are a lot of people, especially rich people, who would definitely benefit from having American-style capitalism, very strongly pushing for it. But
and the other part of it, to what extent does European affluence depend on having this enormous American market, where there is such social polarization and a lot of cheap labor, actually, and a big military force to manage the global system. I mean, can Europe do what it's doing without America doing what it's doing?
Well, in terms of the pure economic demand, Europe doesn't really need America very much anymore. I mean, it maybe it did in the 1950s and 60s, but today the European market is bigger than the American market. 60-70% of European trade is within Europe. So actually, economically, it doesn't need the United States anymore. Maybe it, in terms of global geopolitics and so on, it does, but I'm not enough of an expert to comment on that.
So in the book, and here's the book again, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, you go through 23 things. So let's do one or two of those things, and then this is the beginning of a series of interviews we're going to be doing. We'll run one every other day till we do 23 things. And we'll do a couple now, and then we'll move on. So thing one, there's no such thing as a free market.
Yes.
So explain that, because we're all being told that not only are we in a free market, they should be freer, and
exactly,
go on.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of people find that statement quite mysterious because they say, you know, I mean, some people don't like the free market, but we know what is a free market when we see one, you know, at least. I mean, maybe tricky to define in theoretical terms, but in the same way, we see, we know what an elephant is without being able to define it when we see one.
But your argument is there's no such thing. So,
no, actually not.
So why do you say that?
The point is that, you know, all markets have a lot of regulations, you know? I mean, this is without exception. But people think there's a free market only because they accept those existing regulations so much that they fail to see them. You know, for example, do you think that America has a free labor market? I mean, yes. I mean, it has some regulations, but you think it's relatively free compared to European market. But how about the ban on child labor? You know, I mean, this is shutting out 30% of potential labor force from the labor market. Don't forget that in this country and in the European countries and in the past and in many developing countries today, children as young as 4 or 5, you know, millions of children, hundreds of millions of those children work. You know?
And it wasn't free market that gave rise to a ban on child labor. It took government and a law,
exactly,
and
yeah.
people saying,
yeah.
in the interest of the society.
Exactly. So initially, when the people try to, through government legislation, regulate this child labor, a lot of the supporters of the free market are outraged. They said this is the most ridiculous the intervention that undermines the very basis of a free economy, i.e. freedom of contract. You know, these children want to work. These people want to employ them. What is your problem? Yeah?
It also seems rather contradictory that on the one hand, some of these forces defend the free market. On the other hand, it's okay to ban collective bargaining rights. Like, it's not okay for workers to say, I'm not going to sell you my labor unless you meet certain conditions.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's no free market for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's that total double standard, you know. I mean, basically, the very reason why I wrote that thing one, is to show that, you know, free marketeers have been telling us that, well, we have this scientifically defined entity called the market, the free market, and any attempt to meddle with these workings is the unscientific, politically motivated, you know, and so on. But actually what I'm saying is that, no, actually the so-called free market position is as political as any other position.
I mean, one of the reasons this whole issue of free market came up has had a lot to do with during the 50s and 60s and even before World War II, a lot of countries around the world had a certain kind of nationalist approach to their economies, especially in Latin America and other places where they had public enterprises, there were tariffs. Even in Canada, for example, there were high tariffs for a long time. So free market had a lot to do with opening up markets for foreign and U.S. investment.
Absolutely, yeah. No, but you know, the interesting thing is that in Thing 7, I explain how the very idea of protectionism was invented in the United States. You know, Alexander Hamilton, this country's first ever Treasury Secretary, the guy you see on the $10 bill. I mean, he came up with this idea of infant industry protection, arguing that the United States, as a young country, needs to protect and nurture its young producers, the infants, against that competition from these big grown-up companies from Britain and other European countries. As a result, actually, the United States had the highest tariff rate in the world for over a century up to the Second World War.
Which gives them time to build up an
Exactly,
independent economy.
But unfortunately, the historical pattern is that once they reach that point, they say, well, that everyone else should do free trade. So that actually the Americans were in the 19th century criticizing the British for preaching free trade, pointing out that actually Britain also grew on the basis of protection and subsidies in the 18th century. Now that they're on the top of the world, they tell us Americans not to do it, but we will do it. I mean, actually, there's that in the book I cite Ulysses Grant, one of your presidents, saying that the English tell us to do free trade. Yes, we will do free trade, but only after the 200 years of protectionism, when we are as rich as they are.
Yeah, I guess, and then once you become an imperial power yourself, you start having
Exactly,
imperial ideas about what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, you are seeing the same with the later developers. For example, Japan notoriously controlled foreign investment. Today, you go to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, the Japanese government routinely kind of submits these documents which say regulating foreign investment is bad for economic development.
And it's the same story in Canada, which is they had high tariffs for a long time.
That's right. Yeah.
But once you started to have some very big pools of capital in Canada that wanted to start going
Exactly,
abroad,
yeah.
all of a sudden, okay, you can drop our tariffs now.
That's
And now
right,
all of you drop your tariffs.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, in the next segment of our interview, we're going to go to thing 2. Companies should not be run in the interest of their owners. That's a provocative one, and please join us for the next segment of our interview with Ha-Joon Chang on the Real News Network.